Piper Alpha. On July 6, 1988, in the North Sea, about 120 miles northeast of Aberdeen, Scotland, the night shift was underway. The Piper Alpha production platform stood as a steel island in the dark water, processing oil and gas far from shore. Operated by Occidental Petroleum, it was one of the largest platforms in the North Sea, and that night it carried 226 men. Earlier in the day, a condensate pump known as Pump A had been taken out of service for maintenance. Its pressure safety valve had been removed, and the open pipe was sealed with a temporary metal plug. Late that evening, the second condensate pump, Pump B, failed. The control room staff moved to restart Pump A to keep the gas flowing, unaware that its safety valve was gone. High-pressure gas escaped through the temporary plug, and around 10 p.m., the gas cloud ignited. The first explosion tore through the control room. At 20 past 10, gas pipelines feeding in from neighboring platforms ruptured, pouring tons of gas per second into the fire. The platform became a tower of flame. Men trapped in the accommodation block waited for a rescue that could not reach them through the heat and smoke. 61 men survived by jumping from heights of up to 174 feet into the burning sea. Around 10:50 p.m., a massive explosion from a ruptured gas line destroyed much of the structure. Rescue boats pulled survivors from the water, and the fast rescue craft Sandhaven was destroyed in a blast that killed 2 of its crew. By 11:50 p.m., most of the platform had collapsed into the sea. The official inquiry, led by Lord Cullen, found that the first explosion came from condensate released through the unsecured flange where the safety valve had been removed. A breakdown in the permit-to-work system meant the night shift never knew that Pump A was unsafe to start. 167 men died, making Piper Alpha the deadliest offshore oil disaster in history, and the Cullen inquiry produced 106 safety recommendations that reshaped North Sea operations. Of the 167 who died, 30 bodies were never recovered. Ocean Ranger. On February 15, 1982, on the Grand Banks, about 170 miles east of St. John's, Newfoundland, a fierce North Atlantic storm was driving winds near 120 miles an hour and waves topping 60 feet. The Ocean Ranger was the largest semi-submersible drilling rig in the world, owned by Odeco and drilling for Mobil Oil. 84 men were aboard that night, working the Hibernia field through the worsening weather. A massive wave struck the rig and shattered a porthole in the ballast control room. Seawater poured in and flooded the controls that kept the rig level and stable. With the ballast system compromised, the rig began to list. The crew could not correct the tilt, and the platform settled lower into the storm-driven sea. In the early morning hours, the Ocean Ranger capsized and sank into the freezing Atlantic. The crew attempted to abandon the rig, but in the storm and the near-freezing water, there was no real chance of survival. Rescue ships and aircraft reached the scene but found only bodies in the water. All 84 men were lost, and autopsies of the 22 who were recovered confirmed they had died of hypothermia. The investigation found that the ballast control room porthole was a serious design flaw, dangerously exposed to wave strikes, and that the crews had never been trained to operate the ballast system by hand once the controls shorted out. Survival suits and lifeboats were inadequate for the conditions. A royal commission found the disaster had been preventable, and it led to sweeping reforms in offshore safety, training, and survival equipment in Canadian waters. Alexander Kielland. On March 27, 1980, in the Ekofisk oil field in the Norwegian North Sea, the weather was rough, with dense fog, winds gusting to 40 knots, and waves up to 40 feet. The Alexander Kielland was a semi-submersible platform owned by Stavanger Drilling and hired to Phillips Petroleum, used as floating accommodation moored alongside the working Edda platform. That evening, 212 men were aboard, many of them resting in the living quarters after their shifts. Without warning, one of the platform's 5 support legs broke away from the structure. The rig immediately tilted some 30 degrees. With one leg gone, the platform lost its balance and could not be stabilized. The list grew worse as the remaining structure took on the strain. Within about 15 minutes of the leg failing, the Alexander Kielland capsized. Many of the men were trapped inside the accommodation block, and others could not reach the lifeboats in time. Rescue vessels and helicopters pulled 89 survivors from the freezing water. 123 men died. The investigation traced the failure to a bracing that connected the lost leg, which had cracked from metal fatigue. A small weld for an instrument fitting, made during the rig's construction in 1976, had seeded the crack, and the design lacked the structural redundancy that might have held the platform together after a single failure. It remains the deadliest disaster in Norwegian waters since the Second World War, and it forced major changes in how offshore structures were designed and inspected. Deepwater Horizon. On April 20, 2010, in the Gulf of Mexico, about 41 miles off the coast of Louisiana, the evening had begun with a celebration. Executives had flown out to the rig to mark 7 years without a lost time injury. The Deepwater Horizon was a massive drilling rig owned by Transocean, working the Macondo well under contract to BP. 126 people were aboard, finishing the work to seal the exploratory well. Then, a surge of high-pressure natural gas blasted up through a cement seal that had just been set in the well. The gas raced up the riser to the rig and found an ignition source on deck. At about 9:56 p.m., the rig erupted in a series of explosions, and fire engulfed the platform. 11 men working near the drill floor were killed in the blasts. The roughly 100 survivors scrambled to lifeboats and life rafts as the rig burned around them. Nearby vessels pulled survivors from the water and the rafts, and 17 people were treated for serious injuries. The Deepwater Horizon burned for 2 days before it sank on April 22nd. Investigators found that the blowout preventer, the last resort device meant to seal the well in an emergency, had failed because the drill pipe inside it had buckled, so the device never fully closed. Federal investigations blamed a chain of failures in well design, cementing, the reading of pressure tests, and cost-driven decisions made under schedule pressure. The 11 men who died were never recovered, and the sinking triggered the largest marine oil spill in United States history. BP eventually agreed to pay billions of dollars in penalties and settlements. Mumbai High North. On July 27, 2005, in the Arabian Sea about 100 kilometers off the coast of Mumbai, India, the monsoon was driving 35-knot winds and a 5-meter swell against the offshore complex. The Mumbai High North platform was a major production hub operated by the state oil company ONGC, gathering crude and gas from a field that supplied much of the nation's output. That afternoon, a multi-purpose support vessel called the Samudra Suraksha came alongside the platform. A cook aboard the vessel had severed the tips of 2 fingers, and with no helicopter available in the monsoon weather, the crew brought the ship in close to transfer him by a man-riding basket. The platform's sheltered leeward crane was out of service, so the vessel was forced to approach from the windward side, where the wind and current pushed it toward the structure. In the heavy seas, the Samudra Suraksha lost control and drifted into one of the platform's export risers, the pipes carrying oil and gas up from the seabed. The collision ruptured a riser, and the escaping gas ignited into a roaring jet fire. The flames spread across the platform and engulfed the vessel beside it. Within about 2 hours, the fire had destroyed the Mumbai High North platform. 22 people were killed, while 362 others were rescued over some 15 hours, pulled from the water and the burning structure. 6 divers trapped in a saturation chamber aboard the vessel were brought out alive 36 hours later, and the Samudra Suraksha itself sank 4 days after the fire. Investigators traced the disaster to the collision, finding that the broken crane had forced the vessel onto the windward side, and that its positioning had failed in the high seas. It stands as one of the worst offshore accidents in India's history. Seacrest Drillship. On November 3, 1989, in the Gulf of Thailand, Typhoon Gay was bearing down on the region, throwing up winds over 100 knots and waves around 40 feet. The Seacrest was a drill ship working a gas field under contract to Unocal, and 97 crew were aboard as the typhoon closed in. The ship was still connected to the wellhead, and its derrick was loaded with around 200 tons of drill pipe. Standard practice in heavy weather was to lay that pipe down to lower the ship's center of gravity, but it had not been done. As the typhoon's full force hit, the heavily top-loaded drill ship lost stability in the towering seas. The Seacrest capsized so fast that almost no one had time to react. It rolled over in the dark, trapping most of the crew aboard or throwing them into the water. Search teams arriving after the storm found only the overturned hull. 6 men survived, and 91 died. Investigators concluded the ship had gone over because the derrick was still loaded with heavy pipe, and the vessel remained connected to the well, leaving its center of gravity dangerously high when the typhoon struck. The disaster led to a major lawsuit against the operator, Unocal, over the decision not to secure the rig before the storm. Bohai 2. On November 25, 1979, in the Gulf of Bohai off the coast of China, a powerful storm was running across the Gulf. The jack-up rig Bohai 2 was being towed to a new drilling site, with 76 crew aboard for the move. It was a Japanese-built rig, operated by a Chinese state oil company. As waves washed over the main deck, a ventilator pump broke loose from its mounting. The heavy pump fell and punched a hole about a meter wide in the deck. Seawater poured through the breach and flooded the pump room. The rig began to settle in the water and lose its stability. Overwhelmed by the flooding and the heavy seas, the Bohai 2 capsized. Most of the crew were thrown into the cold water with little chance of rescue. The accompanying tow vessel was unable to mount an effective rescue, and 72 men died. Only 4 survived. The investigation found that the crews had failed to secure equipment for the tow and had not followed bad weather procedures. The Japanese-built rig's operating instructions had not even been translated into Chinese until after the disaster, and the towboat lacked emergency training and rescue gear. It was one of the deadliest offshore disasters in Chinese history, and it prompted a national reckoning over offshore safety standards. Enchova Central. On August 16, 1984, in the Campos Basin off the coast of Rio de Janeiro, Brazil, the Enchova Central platform was producing oil and gas when a blowout tore through the well. The platform was operated by Petrobras, Brazil's state oil company. As the blowout escalated into explosion and fire, the order came to abandon the platform. Crews moved to the lifeboats to escape the flames, and one lifeboat, loaded with workers, began its descent toward the sea. Then, the lifeboat's lowering mechanism malfunctioned. The bow hook failed, and the boat was left hanging vertically, dangling from its stern by a single support high above the water. The stern support gave way, and the lifeboat fell between 30 and 60 feet into the sea. 36 of the men inside were killed. 6 more died when they leaped from the platform itself, jumping 100 feet or more toward the water below. Rescue craft recovered survivors and bodies from the water around the burning platform. 42 men in all were dead, almost every one of them lost, not to the fire, but to the failed evacuation. The blowout was eventually brought under control, but the lifeboat failure became a defining case study in offshore evacuation safety, driving redesigns of lifeboat release systems across the industry. Nearly every one of the 42 who died was killed not by the blowout, but by the very equipment meant to carry them to safety. If you'd like to see more videos like this, subscribe and tell me what to cover next in the comments.